Console exclusives are as old as video games themselves. Granted, back in the day, you didn't really have much of a choice as to where you could play your games. I want to explore this topic of console exclusives because of an article I recently read. They posed the question, are exclusives pro or anti-consumer? We'll have more information after this intro. A couple of recent articles have really piqued my interest in this topic. The main article was on GamesCrate, and it talked about whether or not console exclusives were really pro-consumer or anti-consumer. A few other articles on GamesIndustry.biz really reinforced this on my mind, including their article about Microsoft having an evergreen system with the launch of the Xbox Series X, the Xbox One X, the Xbox One, the Xbox One S, and all the different variations in the Xbox family really made me think about how console exclusives are currently affecting this generation and how they're being brought to the forefront in the next generation. As we all know, Xbox will not have any console exclusives on the Series X. That's right, no console exclusives. Now, this is a bit misleading, and there will be some exclusives to Xbox. You won't find your Gears of War suddenly on the PlayStation Store. Those will still be within the Microsoft ecosystem, but that means every game for the next couple years that is released for the Xbox will be playable on the Xbox One, the Xbox One X, the Xbox One S, the Xbox One S all digital, the Xbox Series X, and Windows 10. Yes, they will be playable across the entire Microsoft ecosystem. Let's face it here, the Xbox operating system is basically Windows 10. This means porting a game from the Xbox to Windows 10 is far simpler than porting it from the PlayStation to the Xbox. All the games released for the Series X will be guaranteed to play on the Xbox One, the Xbox One X, and the Series X, and Windows 10. Sony has come out and said that there will be console exclusives. There will be games you can only get on the PlayStation 5 that you cannot get on the PlayStation 4. Much like the last console cycle, we're seeing two vastly different approaches to this topic of how they're going to treat the new systems in this new generation. For many of us, it's hard to think of a console without immediately thinking of their mascot. Now, when you hear Xbox, you immediately go to Master Chief. You go to Marcus Phoenix from Gears of War. Now, because of the success that Spider-Man has had, everybody associates Spider-Man with the PlayStation 4, as well as Nathan Drake with the Uncharted series. I used to immediately think of Crash Bandicoot, but since his re-releases of his platformers and the Crash Bandicoot kart racing series, I don't necessarily think of Crash associated with Sony, since you can play all of his previous games on a PlayStation, on a Nintendo Switch, and on an Xbox. When you think of Nintendo, you immediately think of Mario. Mario is synonymous with Nintendo. On top of that, you have Sonic with Sega. Back in the day, back in the 90s, those two went hand in hand just like Mario and Nintendo. Unfortunately, Sega is no longer making the console games, and Sonic has kind of migrated over into the Nintendo sphere. The Sonic games have been on multiple systems, but now I more associate Sonic with Nintendo, especially after all the Olympic video games. With all that in mind, Angelo D'Argino over at GamesCrate posed an interesting question. Are exclusives anti-consumer or a brand identity? That's a bit of a tough question to answer. As weird as it is, why can't I legally play Super Mario Odyssey on my Xbox One? Why hasn't Nintendo made an Xbox version? Or vice versa, why can't I play Gears of War on my Nintendo Switch? Why isn't God of War on Xbox or PC? This is a major topic going forth into this new console cycle. At the end of the last cycle, we were hit with always online DRM. Fortunately, as gamers, we all did band together and really push back at Microsoft's always online DRM. That was a terrible idea. Fortunately, that is not an issue that we have to worry about on consoles at this moment. I would not be surprised if this comes in later down the line. At the same time, they were pushing digital downloads, and back in 2013, that wasn't a thing. Consumers were not excited to download their games libraries. Now, with Xbox Game Pass, with games with gold, with the free games with PlayStation, it's more acceptable. You're more open to the opportunity to download games, the convenience of just being able to sit down and play a game. You don't have to get up and change a disc, as inconvenient as that was. Wow, was that an inconvenience? Hashtag first world problems. Yeah, that really was a first world problem there. Now that you have your digital library, you could just switch between games, no problem. So how did we get here? How did console exclusives really become a thing? We have to go back to the late 80s, early 90s, when you had the three-way battle of Nintendo, PlayStation, and Sega. Formerly a two-way battle between Sega and Nintendo. We kind of know how that one turned out already, but back then you had Sonic and you had Mario. You had these two different libraries where you can only play certain games on your Genesis and you can only play certain games on your Super Nintendo. There was no crossing over. None at all. Now, why is that? Why didn't we see Donkey Kong come over to Sega? Why didn't we see Sonic go over to Nintendo? Besides them being separate IPs and mascots for their respective systems, there was hardware complications. The way that the Sega hardware processed sound and video was incredibly different than the way that a Nintendo system processed sound and video. So porting a game from one system to the other just didn't happen. There are very few examples of games that were cross-platform at the time. It was incredibly difficult because you had to essentially rewrite the game. Look at the way Aladdin turned out for both Nintendo and Sega. It was supposed to be the same game, but they're vastly different. Looking past just the graphical differences, there's gameplay and level design that is just different. There were two different teams that worked on these to be able to get the game out to launch at the same time on two different systems. Yeah, you had two different systems, two different teams, two different ways to program. Now, if you look at the way Sony and Microsoft are, those machines are basically PCs with specific operating systems. It is much easier now to be able to port one game from the other, because let's face it, the frame rates are about the same. The graphics are about the same. Everything is nearly identical from machine to machine outside of the operating system. The hardware, very, very, very close to each other. So, porting one game from the other, you know you're going to get about the same thing. But back in the day, you were still having to choose between Sega and Nintendo. You had to choose based on their library of games. Yes, there were some crossovers. Yes, there were games that were very similar from system to system that might not have been identical, but they were close enough. But you still had to make a choice. It's much like in today's world where you have to choose between Amazon Prime and Netflix. Now, you could get both. A lot of people do. I get both. You have to respect the fact that each service has a different library. Yes, there are some games that come over. Hey, they're cross-platform. Boom. They cross over. But for the most part, you're not going to be able to watch The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel on Netflix. Likewise, you're not going to be able to watch the Daredevil series on Amazon Prime. You have to make a choice. So that's what we did way back in the late 80s and early 90s. We made a choice. Did we want Sega? Did we want Nintendo? Or did we want PlayStation? Now you have two vastly different philosophies going into this next console generation. You saw this start up a few years ago when you saw Xbox starting to push games with gold, their Game Pass, and a huge push for backwards compatibility. There was that huge event where they said, hey, we've got backwards compatibility, and for you studios out there, it's as easy as calling us up and say, hey, I want my game brought forward. That's it. Microsoft did all that work. They were really pushing that nostalgia feeling and trying to get gamers to buy into their system by bringing back all these old 360 and original Xbox games forward into the current generation. Up until recently, Sony didn't have a great answer. Now you can get free games with your PlayStation Plus account. They do the same thing that's equivalent to their games with gold. there's not a great answer to Games Pass. That is Microsoft's winner right there. And PlayStation initially was a little better with the backwards compatibility, but right now, Microsoft is kicking their butt with that. Sony has a lot of work to do, and we can see that coming up in their next generation. Right now, Microsoft is taking a page out of Apple's playbook and trying to sell an experience. Let's face it, there's nothing all that special about the way Apple makes their products. Generally speaking, there's nothing special about the components, but they're selling you that experience. They're selling you a design. They're selling you the customer service. And right now, Microsoft is trying to use that to their advantage when it comes to consoles. They're trying to sell you this experience, show you, hey, you know what? You might not have the money right now to get that Xbox One X or to get this fancy new gaming PC. But guess what? You still have an Xbox. Maybe you got one on sale. Maybe you got an Xbox One X on sale. Guess what? That console is still great. It's still awesome. We're going to help you out. We're going to support you. We're going to be there for you. And then you can save up your pennies, save up those dollars, and maybe one day down the road, you'll be able to get that Xbox Series X, get that big upgrade in your computer, because guess what? Any games that are released on the Series X are going to be backwards compatible with the Xbox One and Xbox One X. You'll be able to bring that huge library forward into the Series X. You'll have plenty of games to play, so don't worry, you don't need to go out on launch day and get this. We're here for you. We're here for the long run. So overall, I think that's a great idea. They're trying to sell you this experience. So what really helped Xbox make this tonal shift? What pushed them into this direction? It's kind of a surprising source, to be completely honest. It would be the Wii U, or more specifically, how the Wii U failed. As we all know, Nintendo tried to innovate with the Wii U, having that separate giant gamepad with you. It was a creative idea. They had some interesting concepts with some of the games, between having them on the full screen and on your mini screen, or just taking the games with you, but you had to have the Wii U on all the time for that to work. So Nintendo saw the writing on the wall and they're like, hey, we're not going to drag along this failing console. It's costing us money. No one wants to develop it. No one's playing the games. No one's buying it. It's gone. They then came out with the Switch. The Switch came out mid-generation. Who does that? Everybody's been on the same cycle. Everybody has released a new console around the same time or within a year of each other. Now, Nintendo goes out and goes, hey, we got this new console here. It's great. It's fantastic. You should get one. Microsoft and Sony had no response to this. No one had released a console mid-generation like that. So, while it had been kicking around on the back burner, both companies decided that they had to launch something, had to get something out there. That's where we got the One X and PS4 Pro. Those consoles were this nice half-step generation that we had never seen before. Many had likened it to Apple, where, again, Apple every 6 months releases a new phone, and usually you get your base phone, and then half a year later, it's just a marginal step up. This is exactly what it was. The Xbox One X and the PS4 Pro were just a minor step up. They had some graphical improvements. They had some decent improvements there. Overall, it wasn't a major console release. So, Microsoft is looking at this going, all right, we just released a console a couple years ago. We're going to release another one that will, again, only have some minor updates. It will be more powerful than the Xbox One X, but overall, it's not going to be hugely different. The average consumer isn't going to notice much, especially if you don't have a 4K TV. At least not at the beginning of the generation. Towards the end of the generation, you typically see how far graphics have come, how far a system has been pushed. Just look at Rise Son of Rome to Gears of War 5, or any other Sony game where it's the same thing, where you look at the first game that was released at launch time back in 2013 versus a game that was just launched now in 2020 or even just last year in 2019. There is a huge graphical difference, mainly because they didn't change the hardware. Sure, they did this generation, they did change some hardware parts, but for the most part, it comes through optimization and tricks you can use to try to figure out how to squeeze more performance out of the same hardware. Now, again, this probably sounds a little bit familiar. The Series X is kind of a step up, but not as big of a step as it would have been if you went from the Xbox One to the Series X. This is a good thing, in my opinion, because now you can draw in more people into the Xbox ecosystem. The Series X launches, you see the Xbox One X, price slash. You see the Xbox One S, the Xbox One, the Xbox One all digital, price slash. Boom. Now you've got cheaper consoles that will still play the latest games for people who didn't want to spend full price. They don't want to spend $400 or $500 on a console. Right now, at the time of recording, you can find an Xbox One on Amazon for under $250. That's insane. That is crazy. You can get a brand new console for $200 or less, and it's capable of all these great HD graphics. Just think of how many more people Xbox will bring into their ecosystem as it comes out. They'll be able to please their tech-savvy customers with the power, the performance of the Series X. They'll be able to bring in more budget-conscious people with the less expensive Xbox One, or even the Xbox One X, which is still an impressive machine. Overall, this has the potential to make Microsoft a ton of money. Maybe you don't upgrade for 2 years, but you still have that back catalog that you can still bring forward. It's a great marketing strategy. I think Microsoft is onto something with this, but let's not forget what Sony is doing here. Sony is taking the exclusives route. They're going to have games that are only playable on the PS5. That's right. Some of their games will only be playable on the PlayStation 5. That's typically what we see here when you have first-party studios releasing for the latest generation, and then you'll have other studios, those third-party studios, your EAs, your Bethesdas, your Ubisoft. They'll traditionally make games for your PlayStation 5 and PlayStation 4, and there will be a fidelity difference between the two games. So what's interesting here is PlayStation saying, no, screw off PlayStation 4, we don't care about you anymore. We're focused on the new one, the latest, greatest tech that we have here. Again, traditionally, that's what's always happened. The first-party studios make first-party games for the newest console and don't care about the previous generation. And this is why Sony is really doubling down on their exclusivity. They're PS5 only. They're trying to get more people to buy the PlayStation 5, to abandon their PS4s. I mean, let's face it, they have some great exclusives. Just look at God of War and Spider-Man. Both were award-winning, fantastic games. Why wouldn't they keep going with what's worked? Their exclusives are fantastic. Their exclusives will sell consoles. Right now, Microsoft doesn't exactly have it in the bag for exclusives. It used to be Halo and Gears. Those are going to sell consoles. Now, Halo took way too long to come out on the Xbox One. Gears 4 took way too long to come out on Xbox One as well. So overall, Microsoft isn't doing so great with their exclusivities. When you look at it, it makes perfect sense as to why Microsoft is taking the approach of an evergreen system, how everything's going to be playable across their whole spectrum of consoles, and PlayStation is going with the, hey, you're going to switch to the PlayStation 5. That's it. You're going to buy it because Spider-Man 2 is going to be on PlayStation 5 only, because God of War is going to be only on PlayStation 5, because any other exclusives that are coming out are only going to be on PlayStation 5. Combine this with the easier process of development for the PlayStation 5. Think of it this way from the developer's point of view. I only have the PlayStation 5 to worry about. I don't have to try to optimize for the PlayStation 4. I don't have to worry about anything else except the PlayStation 5. I only have to optimize the PlayStation 5. It's got this set of hardware, that's it. That's all I have to worry about. Now, if you're developing for Microsoft, you have to worry about the hardware in the Xbox Series X, the Xbox One X, the Xbox One, the Xbox One S. You have to worry about the hardware that's in PCs. And let's face it, a PC is a mixed bag. No one runs the same system. There are thousands of different combinations of hardwares out there. Just right off the bat, are you running with Intel or are you running AMD? For graphics, are you running NVIDIA or are you running AMD? There are so many combinations just with that it's really difficult to optimize and get all the bugs out of their system. So when you look at this, you know that there will be inherently less bugs at launch for a PlayStation 5 versus an Xbox game. Sony is really banking on that to hurt Microsoft. Because let's face it, there is a significantly higher chance that bugs will make it through on the Xbox ecosystem because of how the games have to be developed versus how they have to be developed for only the PlayStation 5. Now you can make the argument that you want to stay with PC. You want to use your $2,000 gaming rig because hell, that's going to have a much higher quality image than a PlayStation 5. That's true. But again, remember, you're going to have to deal with a lot more bugs. It's going to take some time for NVIDIA and AMD to roll out some driver patches, for the developers to roll out some patches to get the game truly optimized for all those fringe cases, for all those different unique systems. It's going to take time. Where PlayStation 5, yes, it might be a step down in graphics, but overall, it just works. I know that's an infamous quote right now, but it will. It'll just work. It'll be better right off the bat. For the long haul, PC, definitely the way to go for graphical fidelity. However, in the short term, and for a far less cost, you can get a great image with your PlayStation 5. Just think of it this way. An RTX 2080 Ti is a $1,000 plus graphics card. At the projected cost, you can get 2 PlayStation 5s or 2 Xbox Series X for the same cost. And remember, just because you have that RTX 2080 Ti doesn't mean anything. You still have to build a system around it. You still have to have all the other components, where the PlayStation 5, the Xbox Series X is just going to work right out of the box. Now that you've heard both sides of the argument, you've heard the Microsoft, hey, we're going evergreen, we want to bring in as many people as possible into our ecosystem, forget what they're playing on, we just want to have them in, versus the Sony, hey, we've got you in, you're going to come in, you're going to buy a PlayStation 5 just because of our exclusives. Those are the two arguments there. So the question is right now, are exclusives pro or anti-consumer? We do have to be vigilant for anti-consumer practices, such as the very predatory loot box systems that are out there, as well as whatever Bethesda does with Fallout. Most of that is pretty bad. As well as the refund policies of Blizzard. So, when we're talking about console exclusives, are those pro-consumer or anti-consumer? I think in the PlayStation 5 case, I don't think that's anti-consumer. I don't necessarily think that's pro-consumer, but it's definitely not anti-consumer. On the Microsoft Xbox side, that generally leans, in my opinion, towards a pro-consumer position, though I wouldn't say it's full-blown pro-consumer. Both companies are trying to make a ton of money. We're seeing two different philosophies being hashed out on the battlefield of economics. We'll definitely, in 2 years or less, see which one is the winner based on the practices of the company. If Microsoft wins, you bet that there will be more backwards compatibility offered in the PlayStation ecosystem. Now, if PlayStation is winning and making more money than Microsoft is, then you'll see the Xbox kind of shift to the way things used to be. They'll have their big giant push for console exclusives and try to force everyone on to the Xbox Series X. I think it's going to be really fun to see where this battle ends up. I think there are going to be a ton of advancements, a ton of innovations in the console space. We are just seeing the tip of the iceberg with this. I think there are going to be some huge changes, many of which we'll not be able to predict. There's going to be so much fun to see what happens over the next 6 or 7 years in the console space. It's going to be a wild ride, and I'm glad I'm here to see it in this point of gaming history. Thanks for watching. If you liked the video, give us a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe and ring that bell for notifications. Remember to take care of yourselves both mentally and physically. A little bit of self-care goes a long way. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video.